So we're going to start with balancing the black-red tree algorithm. No, not really. We're going to start with HTML5 and CSS3. Originally, the topic of this presentation was not very clear, so we had to make it up. So first we came up with a nice bombastic name like Unleashed, but actually I wanted to call it HTML5 Dirty Little Secrets. I thought it would work better. Is the keyboard not working? Yeah, I'm going to focus on HTML5 mostly. That's why also I'm wearing the HTML5 superhero t-shirt. Mainly because I'm a developer and less of a designer. Well, in the older times that I was working, we had developers and designers. Now it's about user experience and front-end experts and other buzzwords like this. I'm mostly doing work on the front end with HTML, and I'm doing less CSS, but I'm going to show a few cool things and cool features of CSS3. The idea of this whole session is, in my opinion, is to show some of the cool stuff that you can achieve and how it's advanced us to use HTML5. Who's here using HTML or front end or web of any kind? I mean, not using, everybody's using the web. Who's been developing for a web? Okay. Who's been using HTML5 features? Oh, okay. You don't know? All right. That could also work. Keyboard. Okay. So, a small introduction. My name is Roth. I'm an Israeli living in Bulgaria for the past 5 years. My Bulgarian is so-so. I've been writing code unofficially since 1985 on 8-bit computers. I can even show you what it used to look like. When you used to turn on my old Atari computer in 1985, this is what you would get. It's a screen. It used to make such sounds, and you write a program like, it used to make these sounds. You write it in the language called BASIC, which is the great-grandfather of Visual Basic that Microsoft has evolved. And then you just type it and not all the keys are working. Okay, and then you tap run and it prints to the screen, it runs your code. It has a built-in basic interpreter, and it used to be a lot of fun, and I used to sit here and on this computer and write programs for many, many hours. So this is what I mean when I say that I've been writing code since 1985, but officially on the real IT industry I've been working since 1996, and I've been a developer since 1998. So in the time between I've been doing other kinds of stuff like teaching, training, QA, some tech support, other IT kind of stuff, but since 1998 I've been doing code, and since 2001 I've been doing web-related development. First, it was what we call the classic ASP, which evolved later to ASP.NET with the entrance of the .NET technologies. I've been working at Telerik since 2009, which is about 1 year after I came to Bulgaria. I'm working on a system called Sitefinity, which is a content management system based on ASP.NET. And I've been working as a developer, and in the past year I'm working as a team leader on the software development kit and documentation team of Sitefinity. I'm also working actively on the Telerik Academy. I'm giving courses, and I'm also a member. We have a rock band, so I'm also a member of the Telerockers rock band. You can find us on the Facebook. One link here, this is my personal blog, and you can find all my social links, and you can harass me later on Facebook or on LinkedIn. And also I hope that if everything works here as I hope it does, then we'll have a recording of this session. At least I'm recording the screen, and we're trying to record here some audio on 2 laptops at the same time. So if this works and I manage to get a recording, I'm going to also publish it on my blog here. That's the address if anybody is looking for me. So what are we going to talk about? Like I mentioned, I'm going to talk more about HTML and less about CSS, although the the majority of what I'm going to do here is show cool stuff. I'm going to show some nice demos and show you how some of the features work. I'm not going to go, of course, into all the features of HTML5, definitely not all the features of CSS, but most of the main features that I have encountered here and there, and I'm going to show you how they advanced our lives as developers. So we're going to start with a very quick introduction about a review of HTML and a little bit about HTML5 and the past and the present and the future. And it seems that HTML5 has some kind of pretentious release date in 2022. Yes, it's true. I'm going to show a little bit about the advancements of this head shouldn't be here. I don't know why it is. I'm going to talk a little bit about the advancements and about the specific features of HTML5. We're going to see them in action. I'm going to talk a little bit about JavaScript APIs, which were introduced also with the evolution of HTML5 and CSS3. And I'm going to show a couple of demos related to CSS with the main features that I think people are using. Of course, CSS is huge, and CSS3 has many nice features built into it, like all kinds of rounded corners and gradients and all kinds of stuff that designers really like, but I don't know anything about those. I mean, I know them, but I don't use them on a regular basis. So I'm just going to touch a little bit of more development kind of stuff that's interesting maybe developers more when they come to do CSS. So HTML5. First, I want to give a few words. I'm not sure, but I think maybe some of you are aware of that the whole HT relates to the hypertext. In the old times of the internet, websites used to be only text and images and links, which are officially called hyperlinks. They link from one web page to another. And these hyperlinks were bundled in a textual document, which is referred to as hypertext. That's the hypertext markup, and the hypertext markup language is HTML. And there is also an HTTP, there is also a web network protocol called HTTP that you're all using, that was actually designed just for that, to get information from a server on one side that hosts those pages to a client on the other side. And this all HT also relates to hypertext, and this protocol was designed specifically for that. And that's why it's called the Hypertext Transfer Protocol. And it's used by all the browsers. And this is what happens on every occasion that you're using any kind of web technology, web service, cloud, any application on your phone that does web communication. Of course, when you use your browser, this all happens. And you can, of course, see this. You can see this communication as it's being reflected by all kinds of developer tools. There's a nice tool called Fiddler, which is now part also of Telerik. It used to be an independent tool. And there are other developer tools like Firebug, or if you're using Firefox or Chrome, and you can inspect this communication going in the background. You can see the requests. There's always a request to the server and a response. And sometimes it comes on certain parts of the page, sometimes it's a whole page, but this thing is the basic that works whenever there is a web and whenever there is a communication on the web. So HTML5 is the major evolution of HTML. Over the years, it's been more and more advanced, but there were many features which were not actually standardized in HTML until respectively recently. For example, that today's web, we cannot imagine it without them. For example, the ability to play video or audio on the web, because everybody now plays videos and audios on the web. But before using HTML5, we had to use all kinds of plugins, God forbid, of Microsoft Windows Media, or Silverlight, or Flash, or all kinds of other plugins which were meant to allow video streaming. For example, I'm going to demonstrate a few of those new features. But for example, forms. We fill forms all the time on the web, even though we don't always know that. If you go to Google and you make a search, there's a text box and we perform a search, we submit a form to the server, and then we get a reply. So a lot of work is being done on such forms, which is very standardized. For example, validation of the data before it's being submitted. If you enter the phone number, is this phone number valid? Should we submit the form, or should we stop the operation before it happens? Many of these things should happen. They should be already built in our browsers because they're so commonplace that everybody is using them. And HTML5 comes to extend the older versions of HTML to allow such basic works that are today everybody is using. And they should be already part of everybody's modern web, according to me. HTML started around 1991 when the web started being popular. And actually the feature completion of HTML5 is meant for 2014. And finalizing the specification completely is scheduled to 2022. There are a few resources about this. You can see there is this blog post by Roth, which I think is the one that started this whole 2022 thing. There's a nice website here, if the internet works. Let's see. Yeah, HTML5 is ready. There are many such single-purpose sites. This one is htmlready.com, and it tells you that it is. That means that actually HTML is following the development of the specifications of HTML5 is already following all the stuff that was meant to be developed for it, but the final word on the specification that it's already official, I think, is not yet there. And there's another one that I think I missed it. There are other sites like is Geolocation part of HTML5 that will tell you Geolocation is this browser property that allows a web page to know your geographic location. The internet is a bit slow. This page will tell you if geolocation is actually part of the HTML5 specifications or not. And I know the answer. Almost there. So geolocation is not, but there are many, many other aspects of modern web which are already embedded in HTML5, and we're going to take a look at those. One of the main things is semantic tags. I put here a made-up coffee tag, but you have to believe me that there was a much more explicit picture here before that, and I was asked to remove it. It involved tags and body parts. Yeah. So we'll see some of the improvements that HTML5 has brought to our lives and making our lives as developers easier and better, because all these things that I just mentioned that are today on every website, you might need them, and we don't want to reinvent the wheel every time. You should know that being a developer is all about being lazy and copy-pasting. One thing that I'm not sure how many people are clear about, there is this document type declarations, or DDTs. Before HTML5, nobody really cared about them so much. But once HTML5 started, and they were starting all kinds of, the browsers started getting in different levels of readiness to support different features of HTML5. They started putting those document type declarations here, what we call the doc type. Those you put at the head of before the head of your HTML document, before you start writing HTML, you have to put this doc type. And before HTML5, nobody really cared about that. And once HTML5 started progressing and certain features were implemented by certain browsers and certain features were not yet, they started building those different DDTs to differentiate exactly which version of HTML you're running, so that the browser can be compatible with whatever is on your page, and it could interpret it correctly. So it started looking something like the top one, which is quite hell to start remembering and typing, and frankly, nobody really remembers that. And when HTML5 came, they just decided to put the small one. This is the doc-type HTML, and that's what you should put if you're building an HTML5 document page. This should be in the head of your document, not in the head, but at the top of your document. I gave here a link. Open it now because it will take time to open. The W3.org is the World Wide Web Consortium. It's a collection of big companies that make all the development and all the specifications of all those protocols and HTML and web-related standards. There are many pages here. If you want to read everything about web standards, you can go on this site and you can really read a lot. So I put here a link to this page which gives all DTDs of different HTML versions and different supported HTML versions, and if you're really writing something which is compatible specifically with one of those standards, you should use them. Otherwise, if you're just writing HTML5 or you want to be supported by HTML5, this is what you put on the top of your page. So that's already easier. How to tell HTML from HTML5? This method usually works. It works with other features of web as well. If things don't work on Internet Explorer, probably they're okay. And yeah, well, there are many jokes about Internet Explorer, and they're all true. Okay, a word about semantic tags and elements. I don't know how many of you wrote web pages. Well, I did know, but I forgot. And with HTML5, there was a new set of elements which were defined, like section, header, nav, footer. These things, again, because most of the pages today have a certain structure, and as you're building, let's say, an enterprise web application or any kind of professional website, you usually would have a header and a footer. Usually you would have on one side a navigation bar, on the other hand you'll have some kind of sidebar, or vice versa, and here you'll have some sections and you'll have some information, and rebuilding and redefining those would be just repetitive work on something that already exists. The interesting part here is that those elements don't have any meaning. They have only a semantic meaning for the person building the page. I'll show you an example of that. So here's a website, a very simple one. We have a header here, we have a sidebar with some items, we have a navigation bar up here, and we have a footer down here, and some content in the middle. And if we take a look, actually I'll open Visual Studio to be better, easier to see. We'll be using this. Okay. Just a minute. Okay. So here's my page. I mean, that's the source of my page. As you can see, I have here just a collection of div elements. Divs are just placeholders There are two very popular tags that are used pretty much everywhere. There's a div and there's a span, and not every time people know the difference between them. A div just divides certain lines and puts different blocks on the document, and a span is just an inline kind of separator in your text or whatever you put on the document. So we have here just a collection of divs, and the work which is being done to put them in place is using style sheet CSS. This is an old style sheet. You can see it. So we have here where the divs, and they have different IDs, and our CSS file goes and catches those IDs and puts them in different alignments on the document, and that's how they are actually put. Now let's open another page. Let's close this. You can see this page looks exactly the same like the previous one. Again, I have the content, the navigation bar, the header, the links, and the footer. And if I open this one to see the source, you can see it's pretty much the same, but it's a little more neat. I have a header tag and I have a nav tag. Those behave exactly like the other div tags. And the CSS that I'm using here is actually the same style sheet. And the difference is that I'm catching here this style sheet rule is catching either an element with an ID of header or an element which is a header, the tag name. So it's a double action point here. So what we see here is that those semantics tags help us understand the web better. And if I'm a developer building a web page, it's easier for me to say, okay, this area is a navigation bar. It's not just a div collection of links. And that's the idea of semantic tagging. It doesn't give a lot, except giving a more neat and a more structured and an easier way for me to build my pages in a more understandable way and readable way. So that's one of the things that was introduced with HTML5, to give order on web pages and to give the structure in a way that it has some meaning, except that it's just a collection of nothings. Yeah. Comic relief. Here's another example, playing audio or video, same. Before HTML5, this used to be quite a lot of work. And you have to use a plugin, and you have to know how your streaming is working, and so on and so forth. Now with HTML5, here's the page, here's an audio player. Okay. If we look at the code of this page, that's all there is to it. There's an audio tag, there's a source with MP3, there are some other attributes here for the controls, for the style, and that's about it. And the browser that doesn't support this tag will show audio tag is not supported. And that's about it. No need to do any work except this. So it's here to make our lives easier as developers and to make sense with features which are so elementary today. New attributes that again are today part of HTML5, and how come they haven't been there before. Like for example, when we have forms, we have autocomplete. Why not? I mean, everybody is using autocomplete everywhere. When you're starting to type in Google, we have an autocompletion. When you're starting to type pretty much everywhere, we have autocompletion. We have automatic focus. If you have a collection of fields, you can set the automatic focus on a specific field. You have required or draggable, things that you can drag and drop. I'm going to show a few demos of that too. And I'm going to show also a nice demo of how those web forms have evolved and how you can use things like automatic focusing or validation of the data that the user is entering, which used to be a lot of work for no reason. I'll show a few new input types. So again, on pretty much every web form you have a date field or a phone field, or sometimes you have a color choosing selector. These things took a lot of work to develop, and there are many, many new controls that you can put that are explicitly part of HTML5. So let's see some of those. Let's close these. Again, I'm going to show you two different documents. I'll try to open them online. There's this good, very nice website called JSFiddle. If you're building and you want to experiment with some web, you can use one of those. There's JSFiddle and there's JSBin. They're both very popular. In JSFiddle, all you have to do is put one part HTML, one part JavaScript, one part CSS, and you get the combination right here running. And you can build it, you can fork different versions of it, you can collaborate with other developers. This one, for example, is making use of jQuery library. I don't know if you know it. jQuery is one of the most usable JavaScript libraries out there. Again, because you don't want to reinvent the wheel every time. And if you're building JavaScript, jQuery is like an essential tool. It really, really helps do many, many tasks which are much, much more difficult without. So this is my form. I have here a phone number field. You can see that I have a pattern behind it for the phone number. If I fill something, and I try to apply something which is not legal, I get a notification, right? And I can reset the form. And if I put something which is right, let's put this, have something, and I apply it, the form. Okay, the form gets submitted. I get a forbidden here because there's not really some handler to handle the submission. But again, here's my form. This example took me about, I don't know, 30, 40 minutes to build. You can see that here I have a regular expression for the phone number, and I have some code to set this pattern, and when I click it, to give focus to the text box, and when I click the apply button, here it is, the submit button. I check if my regular expression works, and if it works, and if I find that there is no match, I show the error message. I'm using jQuery for this, and I'm stopping the submission of the form. A lot of work is being done here. This is the actual form up here. You can see that there is an input, which is my text box. I have the span of the pattern, which I, through CSS, put onto my text box. And I have the error message here, and I have the submit and the reset button, and over here I have some CSS so that I have the pattern again, and this is all nice and good. Now let's see an HTML5 version of the exact same form. That's all. Why? I have an input of type telephone number. It is required. It has a pattern, which is a regular expression. It has a placeholder, which is already appearing here. I have some custom code here inline, so that if I type something wrong, I get a custom message, but that's not really necessary. It could work without it. It will still give an error message. And I have my inputs. That's it. There is no JavaScript here. There is no CSS. There is absolutely nothing. But it works the same way. If I type something and I apply, I get the same error message, except that I didn't style it exactly like that. I can reset the form. I can put a real phone number or something that matches my regular expression. Apply, and I get a submission. That's all. So this took me 30 seconds to write, not counting the regular expression, which took me a little time to write. But regular expressions are from hell. So that's an example for you. Let's see some more freaky controls that were added in HTML5. Again, this is a common scenario for a web. I have here 3 sliders. Sliders if I wanted to build sliders in the older times, before HTML5, I had to build HTML and CSS and maybe put an image here that I can slide and drag and drop and all the events, and I have to handle everything with JavaScript. So here's a slider that when I slide, I change the colors here. This is red, green, and blue, and I can create pretty much every combination of web browser color. Down here I have the same idea. I have 3 spin boxes. Spin boxes are like text boxes. I can type in them, or I can just spin up or down. Again, building something like this without the help of HTML5 would have been a lot of work. Let's see the code of this page. So there is one JavaScript method here that actually sets the color whenever we move the sliders or the spin boxes. It constructs this hexadecimal color scheme, color, and puts it here in this div box. That's all there is to it. This is what this method does. It reads the value of those controls and parses it and constructs a hexadecimal string, and then sets the background color to the hexadecimal string that we've constructed. That's all there is to it. But down here are the controls. There's an input of type range, and it has a range from 0 to 255. And once we change it, we call this JavaScript method, and that's all there is to it. There is no additional script or any styling except the styling of the div itself. This square, just to set its size and initial color. That's all there's here. And that's it. So there is a range, and here I have an input of type number, again with a range of minimum and maximum, and calling the same method. And that's it. I think it's pretty neat and very, very useful to have sliders and spin boxes built in. I've added a link here. So I've introduced before the W3 consortium, the W3 org. There's also the W3schools.com, and also a very common website, which is used by many, many developers. I think that this W3 schools and Stack Overflow are the two sites that hold the entire IT industry worldwide. And if they crash, it'll be a big problem. There is a big debate about W3 schools, if it's a good site or a bad site, and some people say it's misleading and it's not really telling the truth and it's telling lies about and fairy tales. But I think it's a very useful site. It has a lot of information on HTML and CSS and JavaScript, and a lot of stuff here is very standard and it's very usable. So the link that I put here, you could reach it from the homepage if you search in the search box HTML5 input. And you get here a whole range of new controls which were introduced with HTML5. For example, a color chooser. Again, they have their own implementation here of this HTML tester. And here's the HTML code. All there is here is an input of type color, and that's it. And this is it. You don't have to write anything. You just let the user choose a color, and you get a color. I mean, but it just makes sense. Here's an input of type date. There are many, many date controls, and for example, Telerik is developing its own controls. We have a few teams which are developing what we call RAD controls. Some of them are designed for ASP.NET, some of them are designed for Windows Forms, some of them are XAML based for WPF technologies. I'm not going to go into details about these buzzwords, but we're building controls that will make it easier for developers to interact with them. If it's a web control, web-based, so we have interaction on the client side with JavaScript, we have interaction on the server side with C# or whatever. But we try to put as many features as possible into this control to make it usable, to make the UI customizable and all that. But for example, a date control, which is an extremely useful control, which is used pretty much everywhere. is just now built in, and the browser takes care of it. You don't need any more scripts, and of course you can interact with this control with JavaScript. If you want, you can customize it with CSS. But the basic thing here, as you can see, with nothing, this is what you get. You get a calendar, which you can choose, and you can spin up and down. And it even has the validation built in. You have to give some real data. So let's choose the date. That's it. It's just that simple. And you can see there are many others that we've seen, like the range and the sliders and the other stuff. It's very useful. And these features, I find it hard to believe nobody really implemented them into the standard until HTML5 came to be, because they are so elementary. I'll talk a little bit about JavaScript APIs that have been extended due to the extension of the HTML5 features, but very likely. For example, we have interaction with Canvas, and we have now drag and drop. I mean, again, you have dragging and dropping pretty much everywhere. You want people to drag certain things because it's very usable, and all the UI experts and front-end UI experience, user experience experts want things to be simple and usable and idiot-proof. And so you want things to be able to drag and drop. But again, if you wanted to do this without the new features of HTML5, you'd have to sit and write JavaScript, or if you could use jQuery, that will make your life easier. But it's just that useful, and it's just elementary. So a canvas is an example of just a draw area. Everything that you can do now with HTML5, you could do before that. But if you wanted to make graphics and drawings, it would have taken more work, or a plugin, or some other, or SVG, or whatever you're using. Now it's built in, so you can just put a canvas on your browser, and you can just communicate with it directly by getting points, filling rectangles or shapes, and you got yourself a graphic environment. For example, here's the canvas. These drawings are just drawn by the script. You don't have to do much. Here it is. I have a canvas here. I have two canvases, and I have some shapes being drawn. Just drawing lines, making paths, choosing colors, and that's about it. It's very simple. It's just built in, and you can build pretty much everything. I wanted to introduce another site here called Chrome Experiments. I don't know if you know it. It's quite an amazing site. This is really, they have many demos here which are mind-blowing, that they are built only with HTML and JavaScript and some CSS. And some of them, of course, Google Chrome is using it's using the WebKit engine, but it's moving to another implementation of its own called Blink, I think. So there are a few built-in engines to render web pages. The WebKit one was developed by Apple. It was built for Safari. Then we have the Google Chrome, which has been using it, but it's actually going on its own implementation. We have Internet Explorer, which doesn't support anything. And we have Firefox, which is using Gecko engine. And other little sub-engines which are related to those pretty much. And this Chrome Experiment site is taking really a full advantage of things that you can do, and I warmly recommend to take a look at things that are done here. So this is a canvas sample of something that was developed on the canvas with HTML5. So you can change the parameters here, and it takes real-time changes. You can change all the parameters of these things, and these things are rendering in real time, and this is using Canvas. If I didn't have HTML5 here, I think it would have been maybe possible only with Flash or with a lot of work. This is also a lot of work, yes, less. So if you want to see some really impressive stuff on the web, go to Chrome Experiments and be amazed. It's hard to see the Chrome, the snow particles. Very nice. So go on Chrome Experiments, you'll see some nice stuff. Drag and drop, again, something very elementary, like I said. You have it pretty much everywhere. It's very usable, it's very easy. Just take something with your mouse and drop it if you want to move files, if you want to move images, if you want to build some hierarchy and you want to be able to drag some things under other things. So drag and drop is something very elementary for every UI that we're building today. Yeah. Here's a drag and drop example. I'm taking this flower and I'm dragging it into this square. And it works. How does it work? Not much. Here's my div, which is the drop area. And here's my image, which is the flower, which has, of course, a source. So I put just a flower PNG in my images folder. And there's not much here. I'm not using jQuery. I'm hardly using any styling, only for the dropping area, just to give it some size and a border. And that's about it. I have JavaScript APIs running here, which are supported by HTML5. I have the onDrag. I made this object draggable. I have the onDrag start event. I have the onDrop event on the drop area. So all I'm doing here is taking the element and appending it to the drop area once it's dropped. But the whole interaction of letting the user take something with the mouse and dropping it is all covered here, and it's already bundled and built in my page. So it makes it, again, much easier, intuitive, and your code is minimalistic in these cases. You don't have to work that hard, and it's already there. Yeah. Actually, yeah, I'm gonna give a few words about offline and local. Yeah, I just wanted to mention these briefly because I'm not extremely in deep familiarity with them, but because I haven't built any offline applications. But one of the things which has been, again, so needed in web, because users are using it all the time, and of course the web is coming into our mobile devices. Phones are now, you can build web HTML-based applications to be running on your phone. Of course, they're not as efficient and as strong as the native applications you're building with your phone's API, but you can do that. And there's a whole part of HTML5 which is dedicated to offline, to applications running offline, and you can do that. You can do a lot of things running offline and not just online communicating with the server. One more thing is the local storage. We had local storage before HTML5. We used cookies, but that was very limited and very limiting, and you did need to store a lot of data on the server, most of the time on the server. We even have SQL storage access, so you can do everything on the client side. You can build an application that will not communicate with the server at all, and Google Chrome is using those a lot. It has its built-in applications that are running in the browser, and they are actually running just as regular applications, and that's the base of the Chrome operating system, which is also mostly based on those principles. So these things, I'm not going to go any deeper into them, but they are, again, very elementary and very useful and very usable in every modern implementation. I think this is a big step. A little bit about CSS now. I mean, these are the basic great features. Yeah, display now. These are the basic main features of HTML5, and I wanted to touch a little bit about what's new with the CSS3, which is also coming. It's usually bundled together when we're talking about HTML5. We're talking about CSS3 because the features are working nicely. So these are mainly some features of the new CSS3. Again, I'm not going to go into opacity and gradients and rounded corners and shadows, and these things that you can do much easier. Some of them were almost impossible to do with the older versions of CSS. You had to use background images, or for the rounded corners, you had to put some images for the corners, and you had to stretch your things. Now it's all built in. Of course, again, just like with HTML5, not all the browsers support all the features all the time, especially if you're building an application which should run on older browsers, because if you're building for an organization that cannot upgrade yet for some reason, you have to be compatible with older implementations. But once you have a browser that supports that, you have all these graphical and advancements like gradients and rounded corners, which have become very useful. New selectors. CSS is all about selectors because you're just putting a style sheet and you have your website on one hand, and you want to address certain elements on the page and to style them, to show them, or to hide them, things like that. So the CSS3 has a whole new range of selectors. So you can select an element by its parent, or you can select an element by its child element. And you can go back and forth, and you can select them by class or by ID. And CSS3 expands those as well to make it much more powerful. Web fonts. Another thing which I don't know how hasn't worked so far, because you want your web pages to look the same, and that also includes in many cases the fonts and the way that the text looks. So now you can have those built in, and CSS supports that. I'm going to show a demo of transitions and animations. Again, it took a lot of work to make animations and things like that. I'll show an example. I just hope I remember. Maybe I have it here. Yeah, I built a small web page, which is a single serving site. You know, single serving sites, those like I showed you before. That is Obama president? Yes. So this one is, if it opens, it's supposed to tell you if it's 6 o'clock yet or not, because then you can go home. Officially, at least. So if it opens, I'll show you, since we are past 6 o'clock, I want to show you the source of this page. First we need the page. Okay. Yeah, so I have here a few neon cats which are running around freely. This happens only after 6 o'clock. If you get it to run before 6 o'clock, I don't know if I can try to show you. Let's try to put it 5 o'clock. Oh, it already happened. So you get this. And you don't get the neon cats. If I reload the page, you just get the grumpy cat. And it's cached. Okay. Let's try once more. Okay, there's a bug. But I wanted to show you the source of this page. There is of course, I'm using jQuery here, so I have a reference to the jQuery 1.7 something. I have some images. Basically, as you can see, the HTML body is very small and simple. All I have here is the grumpy cat image, and all the rest is handled by JavaScript. I have here the timer, which runs and counts and checks whether the time has come, whether it's 6 o'clock or not. And I have here launch the cats, which takes those neon cats and starts putting them. And I have here some arithmetic calculations and appending those into the body. And once they are here, I'm starting an animation through jQuery to just run them around the page. If you want, I think I have a link to this page on my blog, so you can go there and you can. Oh, look at that! Yeah, it's only. But let me show you another animation, much simpler and not as interesting. But here's the page, and here's a moving title. And it's moving, and it's getting slow, and it's moving back again. So in order to build that, I would have to do some kind of work again like I did with the previous one. Let's see how this one looks. So here's the page. All I have on the page is a header title and some paragraph with text, which is this one. All the rest is handled explicitly by style by CSS. There is no script running here. Everything is pure CSS. Now we have here a differentiation of CSS properties. Some of those are triggering explicitly the Mozilla animations, and some of them are used for WebKit animations. So if I take this page and I'll put it in Firefox, I could make it behave differently on the two browsers, but since those two are entwined here, this will give, I have the same parameters here for both the Mozilla animation and the WebKit animation. They both act the same. And of course, you can guess.
Yeah, exactly. HTML5.
Okay, so that's how it works. So I have here an animation. I've given it a name and a duration and all kinds of other properties to run infinitely, and that's about it. I'm changing the margins and moving the text around. I have a few keyframes when the sliding animation comes to change certain aspects. Like the font size at some point, you can see that it's also, I think it's growing a bit. Yeah, it is. So it's moving and growing, and it's just doing it. And I haven't put any script here, and that I think is very cool, because you can just build animations. So you can put advanced controls, you can put animations, you don't have to work almost. You have field validations, you have smart forms, you can put audio, video. It's much more modern and usable, and it just works out of the box. Of course, the box has to be a supporting browser, but those are everywhere. Yeah, I wanted to show also. Yeah, I think we have just one more demo here. So we've seen the animation. You know this one, right? That's how CSS really works. One more thing that I wanted to tackle is the idea of responsive design, because that's a very... I better stop. Yeah. Responsive design is also a big buzzword today, because everybody is using mobile devices with different screen sizes, and responsive design. First, when I heard about it, I thought it's about responsiveness of the UI, but actually the responsiveness here is that you can make your user interface changing according to, for example, the window size. We have media selectors that change. If you have a small window, it will show your UI in one way. If you have a big window, it will show it in a different way. And here's the idea. Everything else. So here again, I have a header and I have a sidebar with some options. Here I have my content, which I've taken from the Bacon Ipsum. You know the Lorem Ipsum? There's also Bacon Ipsum, which is much better because it gives all kinds of meat. Not for vegans. And down here I have the footer, which I put the classic Lorem Ipsum. If you don't know, the Lorem Ipsum is a text which is pseudo Latin. It's not real Latin, but it talks about, if you really take the words that it's trying to put, it talks about the pleasure and the pain. I prefer the bacon anyway. So what I have here, this is what it looks like on my browser, and you can see the sidebar on the side, the content here. But let's see what happens when I start changing the browser window size. Again, there is no script running here. You can see that the respective part of the content starts getting squeezed and the sidebar moves and pushes it away. That's okay. That's expected. But at some point, the sidebar disappears. It's not here on the side. I cannot scroll sideways. It's just not here. If I go down, I can see that it's moved down here. The whole layout of these divs have changed. They've moved one below the other. So if I'm using a narrow screen, narrower than a certain amount, if it's an iPad or any other tablet or something that is smaller than what I have here in resolution, things will look different. I'll have my sidebar options, but they'll be down here. And if I continue to shrink it, it keeps shrinking, and I think at some point the sidebar disappears completely. Yeah, so if you're using it on a phone, let's say, which has a much smaller resolution, you'll see it differently. So this is the idea behind responsive design, and how this is also very useful for today for modern web design and building. So it's just built into CSS3. Let's put it here and see. So again, I have here, I'm not using the semantic tags here, I'm using a div. Okay, we have the header, we have the content, and we have the sidebar. I could have used the semantic tags just as well, but they're now here identified by their IDs. Again, it doesn't make any difference in terms of the implementation. It makes only a difference in terms of readability. And here's my CSS. There is no script running here. So I have here some general rules for my document, my body, font size, colors of links, and etc. The size of the header, what font it's using. And the initial structure of those headers as well, I can see their initial sizes. But here, I have certain media queries. So if my screen is less than 980 pixels, I'm starting to change the sizes and the proportions start changing. You can see that my sidebar, if we look at originally, I don't know how aware you are of CSS, and it's 20 minutes to 9, so I'm not going to go too much into the technicalities of the details here. But you can see that the sidebar originally is floating to the right side. Yeah, my footer is clearing both sides, so it just stays on its own line. The header goes up, and it's just the header, and the content is floating to the left. The sidebar is floating to the right. But at some point, when we are reducing the screen size, the sidebar is now going with the float none. It means it's not going to the right anymore, it's just clearing both sides and it's starting to be vertical wherever it is. So if it is here, just below this div, the content, it will just appear underneath instead of being pushed to the right. This is going a bit into how CSS works, but this is just a regular, usual, everyday CSS. The only difference here is that I'm assigning it to a specific media size. So if my screen is this and that in resolution, it will change the behavior of how this page works. And that's all there is to it. Again, no scripting and no other hidden things here. This page is just plain HTML with CSS3, and that's it. At some point, when we reduce the media size to 480 pixels or less, the sidebar just disappears. It has display none, not the none that you saw before. And so on and so forth. This is just really, really simple, and it adds a lot of functionality to web developers who want to go by designers, and want to go by the rules, and want to make your site at once. You just build it once, and it's already, let's say, mobile compatible, and it could be tablet compatible, it could be different resolutions compatible, just as easily as that. Add something more. Yeah, here I put a few links that you can review if you want to learn more about HTML5, about the progressions. I've also included these three important ones: the W3C, the W3 consortium. If you really want to bore yourself and read a lot of text about web standards, or if you want to join the consortium and make the standards yourself, or if you want to learn how to use them, the W3 schools, I personally support this site, mainly because maybe I'm not a designer. And the Chrome experiments, which can really blow your mind with really amazing things that you can do with all these features that we've just seen. And these are a bit shorter than the time that I expected, because I think nobody asked me anymore. But well, now's the time for that, by the way. So I think the majority of new features and how they improve the lives of developers and designers were covered here. This is what I basically wanted to show, how things that are so common sense and commonplace are now built-in parts of the web, and how elementary and easy, much easier it is to build them now. Of course, you can go and use you should use all the other libraries and jQueries and all the other helpful resources out there, but in basic, browsers have become much more advanced and much more modern, and they come to our help. Does anyone have any questions? Yeah.
Is a question of CSS3 supporting more browsers? Well, they are supporting more browsers, but maybe nice for example. And what's your opinion of libraries such as Modernizer, which maintain its fallback for browsers?
Well, Modernizer actually takes those features and those smart new features and enables them on unsupported older browsers. And I think it's necessary. I mean, it works quite well. And if you're building something and you want it to work reasonably well, or the same compatibility with the same features that you're building for a modern website, and you want it to work on an older browser, that's one of the good options. Of course, you can build things in a very small level, and if you're building rounded corners, or you're building something which is using one of those new features, you can also plug in yourself the older features just so that it will support. But these libraries are very robust, and they're very helpful, I think. And that's my opinion. Yeah.
You do the examples of HTML5 functionality with HTML4 with jQuery. Why did you do them in JavaScript? How much time did that take?
If I built the examples that I built with jQuery,
vanilla JavaScript.
I'm not sure it would take that much more, because what I've used jQuery is mostly, well, the most useful jQuery function that I'm using is to get elements by ID, because I don't like typing get elements by ID. It's just too much to type. By the way, there's also this debate, you know, if I'm putting here some text, right, and I want this text to be bold, I can put B, B, right, to make it bold, or I can put the word strong. The effect is exactly the same. It's just more typing. I've heard that somebody said that the B tag is deprecated. It's not. It's exactly the same. The idea here again is semantics, because, so again, for example, you have the I for italics, right? And you can put it in, I think, emphasized, which exactly works the same, but it's now an emphasized text because it has a semantic meaning of a text that has to be emphasized. But the effect, visual effect, would be exactly the same. So, being lazy, I use jQuery to make my life easier, mostly on reaching elements and their properties. I use it a lot for Ajax, for example, but I've used a lot of old classic JavaScript as well. The difference is not that big, but it does put a lot of easier access to the functions in your hand. So specifically for the things that I've built, and specifically for the things that you've seen here, and this floating cats page, it's just made it a little bit easier for me. If you want to build something like Chrome experiments, maybe there are some libraries here that makes your life much, much easier. But did I answer your question? Okay. Anyone else? Any more questions? About computers? Okay. Then I think we're done for tonight. Thank you.